Hi, good morning, everybody. Hope you're ready for some math this week coming up. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Time to get back to business here. Okay, so this is our Monday math video. We're going to start a lesson this week, kind of the main key lesson for adding and subtracting fractions at the work we're doing. We're going to build on what we did last week with especially common denominators, using the equivalent fractions to find common denominators, which is then going to allow us to add and subtract the fractions. Okay, so I know in fourth grade you did adding and subtracting fractions that had like denominators or common denominators. Today we're going to start getting into this lesson, which is about basically creating common denominators when we don't have them to start with. And then we'll just do the stuff like we did in fourth grade, okay? Um, so as you can see, I'm on page 375. This is adding and subtracting fractions, and we're going to use, it says you can use what you have learned about common denominators to add or subtract fractions with unlike denominators. So just a quick little review and look back at the basic stuff you did in fourth grade. I'm going to kind of go over here and just do a little example. So what you were used to doing in fourth grade was working with finding common denominator or having common denominators and then just adding fractions. So real quick, let's just go ahead and do some of that real fast. Let's say I have a common denominator like 8 here for this too, and we'll just do adding eighths. Okay, so just to kind of go over the basics there. The big thing is when we have common denominators, uh, we don't add those denominators up. We're going to keep them as they are. Okay, and what we do add is the numerator. All right, so these are going to stay eighths. It's kind of think of like we're naming what kind of fraction we have. Okay, let's say we have 1/8 here and 3/8 here. Now you can kind of think of this, I have like 1 of something and I have 3 of something. The things I have are eighths, okay? We're not going to add these up and say I have a certain number of sixteenths. These are the amount of eighths that we have. Think about like slices of a pizza. We could have 1 slice of pizza, we could have 3 slices of pizza, and together we'd have 4 slices of pizza. We wouldn't say, 4 slices of 2 pizzas. It would be still 1 pizza. And that's the same thing here. So just remember, I know this is an easy thing from fourth grade. These common denominators stay the same. We keep that denominator the same, and then we add up the numerator, and then that tells us how many of that denominator we have. Okay, so in this case, we would get 4/8. Okay, so 1 plus 3, of course, we're getting back to using basic skills. 1 plus 3 makes 4/8. Now, the other thing with that, some of you might be looking at that 4/8 and realize, oh, we got to do something else with that too, right? So if we have this fraction, 4/8, think about what can we do with that. What we want to do is put that into what's called the simplest form. Again, that's something you would have done last year as well. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can do that. When we put something into simplest form, bring it down here. If I put a fraction into simplest form, it basically I take an amount that I can divide both by, a factor for each number that I can divide each one by, and that's going to allow me to put it in the simplest form, which again, these are going to be equivalent fractions. So last week we worked on making equivalent fractions, and usually we were kind of making larger numbers equivalent fractions. When we put it into simplest form, we're going to take those equivalent fractions ideas, but we're going to make an equivalent fraction that has like as small of the numbers as we possibly can. Okay, I'm actually going to change this a little bit. So the way we can do that is divide by a common factor. Now if you look at 4 and 8, those have a couple factors in common, but we want to divide by the greatest common factor. So in this case, we could divide them both by 2. But I can also divide by another common. What would be the biggest number these two have in common? Would be 4. Okay, so if I divide each by 4, that's going to get me into what's called the simplest form. And then, of course, 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So now I have an equivalent fraction of 1/2 that's equal to 4/8. So this would be the simplest form. Okay, so our goal is going to be to add fractions by only adding the numerator, and then also put into simplest form at the end if we have to. Sometimes we won't need to. Sometimes it'll already be in simplest form. But this is a look at what you did, stuff you did last year. And what we're going to add in today is that we might not have a common denominator to begin with. So we have to basically get them into this form. So we'll use equivalent fractions to make our denominators the same. And again, that was a skill from last week's end lesson, the second lesson we did. And then we'll also put them into simplest form after we add them up. So we're going to kind of get back to where we can use our fourth grade skills, but we have the first beginning step of needing to find a common denominator. Okay, so let's go through a couple problems like that with these examples here. Here's one about Shelby's, whatever. Again, I'm just going to mostly focus on the fractions here. So here we have, we're going to add 1/4 plus 3/8, and we're going to write your answer in simplest form, okay? There's two ways to go about this, and they both involve having common denominators. If we have fourths and eighths, we can't actually add those because we have to have the same denominator so we can keep it the same when we do the adding. Now, one way they tell us we can do, we can always find a common denominator by multiplying the denominator. So here we can take 4 times 8, and that's going to give us a common denominator. So again, thinking of those, that math multiplication skill fact, 4 times 8 would of course be 32. Okay, so we can use 32 as a common denominator. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to move down here, and we're going to get to 32 for each. Now we have to think, okay, I'm going to make an equivalent fraction. I'm going to take my 1/4 and make it into 32. How would I do that? Well, I would multiply by how much? 4 times what would give me 32 would be 8. Okay, go ahead and put it in. So we multiply both by 8. That's going to give us a number of in 32. So 4 times 8 is 32. 1 times 8, of course, would just be 8. So there's our one equivalent fraction. 8 32s, or 8 32nds, I guess we could say. That's going to give us 1. Now, the other one, we can do 3/8 times what would make 32. How much 8 times what would make 32? That'd be 4, okay? So we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 4, make our math work there. Again, as we see, 8 times 4 makes 32. We can make an equivalent fraction by doing the same thing with the numerator. So 3 times 4 would be how much? Well, that's going to be 12. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my numerators and have a common denominator. Okay, so we're going to keep our 32. Again, we don't add that denominator. Now that we have fraction denominator 32, we're going to keep that the same and then add the numerator. So now 8 plus 12, we just got to think, okay, simple basic fact. 8 plus 12, of course, makes 20. Now, again, this might be one where we need to put in simplest form. Whenever we multiply the denominators, that's always going to give us a common denominator, but it might not be the least common denominator, which means you might have to simplify in the end, okay? So if we get to this one, 20 32nds, let's take a look at how I think a lot of us will probably see we can divide both of those by 2. As long as we have 2 even numbers, we can divide them both by 2. So let's maybe start with there. Now, I'm just going to show you this because I'm thinking a lot of us are going to do this. If we have this, 20 divided by, if we think of dividing by 2, I can think, okay, that's going to be 10, and then 32 divided by 2 would be 16, so we have 10/16. But if we look at that, it's always good to still look and see if you can divide by another number, and in this case, I can do that, where we're going to have to kind of keep going to make it the simplest form, okay? If we can divide by the greatest common factor, that'll get us the simplest form right away. But sometimes we might think that divide by 2 and then just keep going. So I think a lot of us might start dividing by 2. When you get to this is a simpler form, but it's not the simplest form. So it's always good to check and make sure if you can't divide by the same number, it's in simplest form. If you can, then you need to do that. Okay, so now if we see 10 and 10/16, those are also 2 even numbers, and we can divide those by 2 again. So if I do 10 divided by 2, that'd be 5, and 16 divided by 2 would be 8. Okay. And now this is going to be our simplest form. Here's my simplest form. Okay, so there we have it. Now, again, notice there, we could have started off 20 32nds. We could divide by 4. 4 in this case would be the greatest common factor, and then we could get right to the 5/8. But again, sometimes it's just easier to think, I'll divide by 2 to start and then just go from there. But that means you always want to keep checking and go and see, okay? Now, the other way we can do this, and you'll see this is a little quicker, but maybe it's not quite so easy for us to tell what the least common denominator is. Between fourths and eighths, we could start off with a least common denominator. That would be 8, okay? 8 can stay like it is. 4 we can do times 2 and get to 8. So actually our least common denominator is eighths, okay? So now either way, these are equivalent fractions, but if we start off with eighths, we're going to kind of be in simplest form. If you start with the least common denominator, you're pretty much always going to be in simplest form to start, or right off the bat, okay? So here I'm going to use eighths here. 3/8 can stay the same then, so we're going to keep that like it is. 1/4, we have to get to eighths, and how would we get to from 4 to 8 would be we would multiply by 2. Okay, so now I'm going to make an equivalent fraction for 1/4 that's multiplied by 2 would make it eighths. 1 times 2 would make 2/8. And now I'm ready to add these up. So 2/8 plus 3/8, again, I'm going to keep my eighths the same. I don't add my denominator. Denominator stays the same, and I add the numerator. 2 plus 3, of course, is 5. So now look at that. We got there right away when we did that. So if you can start finding that least common denominator, it'll save you some work on the end of the problem where you want to put into simplest form. Either way is good, though, because they both get us to the answer that we want. Okay, so we get to 5/8 there. Again, we start off with two fractions that don't have common denominators, fourths and eighths. What we have to do is go ahead and make those into a common denominator of those eighths, and then we can just do the fourth grade stuff. Just add up the fractions by adding the numerator, keeping the denominator the same. Okay, cool. All right, now we'll also see some subtraction problems on the next page, 376. We're going to do the same thing here, but with subtracting. So you'll have a mix today, and as we go through things this week. So just always, of course, pay attention to the fractions, what operation you're being told to do for each as well. With this one, we've got 9/10 minus 2/5. Now we're going to kind of tell over here what we did. Basically, what do we need to do? We have tenths and we have fifths. I need to make common denominators. Now, again, we could multiply 10 times 5 and have 50, but then we'd have to put in simplest form. If you look at this, 10 and 5, what would be the factor that they have in common? The least common denominator, a multiple of 5 would be 10. We can, in this case, we can once again get from 5 to 10, and we can keep this one the same. So sometimes that's like a good first thing to look for. Can I get from the smaller number up to the larger number for the denominator? And if so, that saves me a little trouble, because here 9/10, I can keep this 9/10. Again. So I can keep this at 9/10. And if I want my 2/5 to be tenths, let's think, what do we do? How do I get from 5 to 10? I would multiply by what? 5 times 2 would make 10, okay? So I need to do the same thing up top with my 2/5. So 5 times 2 makes 10. 2, I have to also multiply by 2, and that makes 4. Okay, so now I can make a common denominator. I can add and subtract. Here I'm going to subtract. Again, my tenths are going to stay tenths. And 9 minus 4 is what we're doing now. So we need to take 9 minus 4 would be 5. Okay, so we get 5/10 is our answer. Now again, what we need to do is look for putting that into simplest form. What can I do with that? 5/10. Sometimes you can look at these right away and think, okay, 5 is half of 10. This is a half. These would be, I can divide both of these now by 5. I can get to 1/2 for my final answer. All right. So that's what we have here. So we did a couple things with that. We had to make a common denominators. And again, in this case, it's kind of easy if we see we can get from fifths to tenths, and that way we can leave this one alone. Then we go from 9/10 minus 4/10, which is the same as 2/5, and that allows us then to have that nice common denominator, which we have 5/10 when we subtract, and then finally put that in simplest form. Now over here it says describe the steps you took to solve. I basically just said that with my words, so I'm not going to worry about typing into the space there. But that is that. Now what you've got the rest of the day is this just number 1 through 6. Now in my next video, I'll go over some of these. We'll go over all of these. So if you get stuck on these, just feel free to go ahead and watch the Tuesday video. For some of these, we can think, what's my common denominators here? Notice 12 and 3, I can use 12ths for a common denominator. So I'll just put a couple hints on here, okay? So that one, you can get from 3 up to 12, and that might save you a little time. For number 2, we have 5 and 7. Those ones are ones we do actually have to just go ahead and multiply those together, okay? 5 times 7 would be 35, so you're going to use 35 for your common denominator here. Okay, so just a couple hints along the way. Just be looking at those again. First thing is you got to find a common denominator. After that, you just go ahead and add them up or subtract them once you have those equivalent fractions, and then put them into simplest form. Okay, so you guys should be all set for that. Again, next video we'll go over just 1 through 6. All you got to do for today after you've watched my video here is to complete problems 1 through 6. Again, look for simplest form. Put those fractions into common denominators with equivalent fractions. Then it's easy to just add and subtract the numerators, and then put them into simplest form. Okay. Again, next video we'll go over these and then move on to the next one. Just a little more practice for the next couple days. This is the big thing for this week. Okay. Thanks again, guys, for watching. Good luck on these, and check out my next video tomorrow, and we'll keep going. All right. Thanks, everybody.